The second installment of 2021 to our Virtual Water Ambassadors program. Thanks for joining us. Can't see everybody's names, but I'll see it in a little bit later. I also wanted to show that we're also scheduled out until the end of March, or March 23rd. So feel free to register for those webinars as well. Hopefully, any or all of those topics will be interesting to you. So just to go through a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you, it sometimes helps with our transmission of the presentation to turn off your video, and you can do that by selecting this little caret here, and you can, or clicking on that to turn it off. You can change your viewing options here. We suggest, I guess it'll probably default to that side by side, so we suggest keeping that. And if you have any questions, you could enter them. Click on that little word balloon there, and it'll open up a chat window, and you could enter any questions or comments there. We're gonna handle any of your questions at the end of the presentations, but as you think of anything, feel free to enter at any time during the course of the presentation. Oh yeah, so we do have all your microphones muted, and if you have audio connected and you can't hear us, click on that arrow to adjust your settings. Oh, and again, as I mentioned, it does help with the bandwidth transmission if your video is off during our presentation. And you can see whoever is participating. And as I mentioned here, you can click on the chat to enter any questions or comments. Okay, and this webinar is being recorded, and so we will. It'll take maybe a day or two before we can get these links out. But once they will be posted on this website. We can also copy and paste that URL address in the chat, so you can link to that directly. So maybe a day, certainly by next week, check out this webpage on Martin County Extension, and we'll have those recordings available in case you want to go back over it or share it with some of your friends that may have missed this, the live presentation. And as I mentioned before, please use the chat feature to ask questions. We will get to your questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, we'd like to welcome Marjorie Shropshire. Marjorie is someone that I've known for quite some time now. She's grown up here in Florida. She's a lifelong Floridian, originally from the Keys or Miami, so she spent a lot of time here enjoying the Florida environment. Marjorie, in addition to her love of all of Florida's environments, her love of art led Marjorie to earn a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the University of Miami. And she has worked as a practicing artist and designer for over 2 decades, where she initially worked in advertising and was a creative director for an advertising agency for quite some time. Later in her career, she has established her own design practice focusing on environmental nonprofits. Marjorie has illustrated several books on sustainable and climate-wise gardening with botanist and garden writer Ginny Stibolt, who one of the books that you can actually purchase through University of Florida Press is called A Step-by-Step Guide to a Florida Native Yard. And I'll try to look for any links to that where you might be able to purchase that online. It's a great book. I have it in my home, by the way, and it's really helped me a lot with switching my landscape into more of a native friendly and wildlife friendly front and backyard. So she also travels around the state facilitating workshops and lectures for homeowners on how to transition their yards to a native landscape. Marjorie is a certified master naturalist. She's a member of the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, and she leads nature drawing and field journaling workshops to teach others about how to look more deeply at nature through art practice. Just recently, in fact, the ink is still is maybe just dry now. Marjorie has earned her Master of Fine Arts in degree in Design and Visual Communications from the University of Florida, and I had the unique pleasure and the honor of serving on Marjorie's committee. Her research centered around issues relating to Florida's water quality and how design and science can collaborate. And so what she's presenting here is really the outcome of her thesis work. And the idea behind WeShore is connecting homeowners, contractors, and nature through living shorelines. So she's exploring how the installation of living shorelines can make waterfronts more resilient by maintaining or restoring that land-water connection, reducing erosion, improving habitat, and filtering sediment and pollutants to help improve our water quality. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Marjorie to the Water Ambassadors series. And Marjorie, will let you take it away. I'm going to get your presentation queued up in just a second. It'll be just a second there. There we go. How's that looking?
It looks good, Vincent.
Okay, great. So yeah, go ahead, take it away, Marjorie.
Right. I'm going to thank Vincent and Lisa for letting me attend the Water Ambassadors program as a presenter. I took this course. I think I actually took the first Water Ambassador course when it was first offered in Martin County a few years ago, and it's really super. And so I'm happy to be back here to present and talk about this project and about living shorelines and native plants and how all these things work together. So the name of this project is WeShore, and its purpose is to connect homeowners, contractors, and nature through living shorelines. And the picture you're looking at here on the first slide is actually up in Cedar Key, Florida, up in the Big Bend area on the West Coast. And you're looking at a very successful living shoreline that was established on Joe Raines Beach. And we're going to talk more in detail about what a living shoreline is, but basically you're looking at some plants that can live in the intertidal zone, and then further out in the water you see oyster reefs. And those are the couple of really important components that are common to living shorelines around the state. Next. So you may not have been to Cedar Key, but you've certainly been to the Indian River Lagoon. And this is an image of the lagoon up in St. Lucie County, up on that bluff, looking out over some native plants at the water, which looks really nice. But if you've lived in Martin County for any length of time, you'll realize that the water is not as nice as it used to be, even maybe 10, 15 years ago. And there's a number of reasons for that. And there are also some things we can do to help it get better. Next. This is a photo taken on the Indian River Lagoon in Martin County, a little bit south of the inlet. And so this shows you mangroves and a sea grape and some grasses, but this is the way shorelines should really look in Florida. They shouldn't be, there should be this connection between land and water. So when the tide comes in, it can go up into the vegetation, and that creates a really rich place for lots of creatures to live. And all those creatures are intertwined with our lives because many of them and these trees help keep the water clean. And so when we remove these things and install seawalls and things like that, it interferes with the ability of the water to be cleaned by nature. Next slide. So I think many of us are also familiar with what happens when we don't take care of the water. And this is an example of the algae bloom that occurred in 2016, which was just tremendously horrible. This photo was taken at a local park on the St. Lucie River in Martin County. And this blue-green algae is a direct result of increase in nutrients in our local waterways. And it's true that Lake Okeechobee is a big factor in this, the major factor in this, but these problems are also happening in other places. So this type of algae bloom is happening now in the northern Indian River Lagoon, where there are no Lake Okeechobee discharges. And these blooms are fed by all kinds of nutrient loading. So for example, if you have a lawn and you don't have any native vegetation to help filter the water coming off your lawn and it's running into the water, that increases the nutrient levels, and it just contributes to this issue. Next slide, please. Martin County has been extremely lucky in that we have not seen what you're seeing in this picture, which I took in the Banana River in Brevard County in 2016 in March. This is also the result of an algae bloom, not the same kind of algae bloom that we're getting in Martin County, but it actually began with cyanobacteria and then brown algae. And the fish kill happened because the dissolved oxygen in the water went to zero for a couple of hours because the algae consumed in their life cycle of living, feeding, living, and dying, consumed all the oxygen in the water, and the fish couldn't breathe. And so I spent pretty much a whole day in this area photographing this and documenting it, and didn't see a single live fish. And there were, I mean, not to belabor it, but if you like to fish and you're a fisherman, what you don't want to see is what we saw, which was 45, 50-pound redfish dead on the beach, along with basically every other kind of fish you can imagine, trout, you know, these little, there's catfish, mullet, basically everything that was in the Banana River ended up dying in that brief couple of hours. So there are really big reasons to not contribute to this nutrient loading that's going on in the Indian River Lagoon. Next slide, please. So what are humans doing along the Indian River Lagoon? One of the things is we're causing habitat loss, and this is a photo I shot up in Indian River County. This is a private property, which at one point was probably a mangrove shoreline and has now been hardened with a dock and a seawall. Next slide. This is an example of an attempt to hold back the tide in the St. Lucie River. This is on the west side of Sewell's Point, and you can see what happens when we make these rigid structures along the shore instead of the dynamic shoreline that nature creates, which can respond to wave action. We build something that's hard, and the waves batter it and undermine it, and the result is erosion. And so hardening the shoreline actually can increase erosion problems. And this is also true on the barrier island on the Atlantic. So if you hear people that live out there talking about building a seawall on the beach to protect their property, they're really exacerbating the issue, this erosion issue. And that is not a solution. Next slide, please. So I've been Debbie Downer here and talked about the bad things, but what can help? Well, one thing that can help is living shorelines. And by definition, a living shoreline is any shoreline management system that's designed to protect or restore these natural shorelines by using natural elements. And the key elements in Florida are oyster reefs, mangroves, and salt marshes. And this photo on the left is in Jensen Beach, and this is an example of a living shoreline project that Vincent was involved with. And you can see in the foreground where the oyster reef and the grasses are, and then look in the background where the neighboring property doesn't have these elements, and you'll see that This property owner is accruing beach. And that's something we'll talk a little bit more about as we move on. Next slide, please. So back to Cedar Key. This is that same installation that I showed you in the first slide, except shot in the other direction. And this is a public beach, and so they've maintained a little area for people to use there where there's no living shoreline. And that's not to say living shoreline won't expand into that area, because it will over time. But you see these three components. You see oyster reef on the left, that dark line in the water, and then also out where those little stakes are, that's a different kind of reef structure. You can see the salt marsh grasses. There's two different species here, one in the zone that gets inundated by the tide, and then one further up the beach that only gets inundated when there's a really high tide. And then the mangroves, which were not planted, they were volunteers here. And those two grasses are Spartina grasses. Next slide. So everybody's probably seen the oysters down at Flagler Park and various other places. The photo on the right is over on Hutchinson Island, and it's near Florida Oceanographic Society as you're coming across the bridge there. But the reason that we put these oyster reefs in is because oysters are natural breakwaters, and they help stabilize the shoreline. So when the waves come up here, instead of undermining this or washing the shore away, their energy gets broken up a little bit by these hard surfaces of these oyster shells. And so one of the things that results is that there's a reduction in suspended sediment. And so if you've heard about seagrasses and their importance in the Indian River Lagoon, and realize that we're having a problem right now with seagrasses staying alive, part of that picture is turbidity. So when the seagrasses are plants and they have to photosynthesize, and so when they can't photosynthesize, they die. And the fact that the sediment gets suspended in the water cuts down on the amount of sunlight that gets to them, and that's one factor. There are other factors as well. Oyster reefs also are natural filters, and so they're filter feeders, and they take in the water along with things like phytoplankton and detritus. They also take in sediment, bacteria, and other contaminants, and they use what they can for food and then expel the rest. But in the process of expelling that, they help it settle down on the bottom, and so it's not suspended in the water column like it was, and thereby enhancing water clarity in their vicinity. And so they also have a function in nature by creating habitats. So there are over 300 species that use oysters, and those range from tiny little crustaceans all the way up to your favorite game fish sometimes have an association with oyster reefs, and also a number of bird species use them. Next slide. Next slide.
Hey, Margie, just a second. It's just, I don't know why it's stuck here. There we go. Sorry about that.
I thought I was stuck. Okay, so moving on from oyster reefs to our next component, Spartina grasses. We talked about these before. And what I want you to take away from this picture is this is Dr. Mark Clark up at Nature Coast Biological Station, and he's holding up an example of that Spartina grass that is planted on Joe Raines Beach. And if you look at the root system, just on that one sprig of grass, you'll understand why these root systems help buffer the wave action, just like oysters do. And they do some of the same things, trapping sediment and reducing pollution and preventing erosion and providing habitat and feeding areas. So these grasses are really, really important. Next slide. And mangroves, we all love mangroves. I know I love mangroves. Mangroves are perhaps the #1 savior for us in terms of resisting storm surges and storm events. And the fact that so many of them have been taken away from our shorelines is it's really sad. And it's causing us a lot of problems. So mangroves reduce wave energy, help protect the shoreline, prevent erosion, and they also work to help maintain water quality and clarity by filtering and trapping sediments from the land. So they help sediments that are in the water settle down among their roots. They also help keep sediments coming from the land from getting into the water. And then there's that habitat function, where they're a keystone species, and it's really kind of amazing the number of animals that live in and around these mangrove trees. There's 3 species of mangroves. The one you're looking at right here is red mangrove, and that's the one that lives closest to the water. Next slide. So we're talking about nature and all the benefits to nature, but one of the things that I studied was what's the relationship between nature and people, and what's this mutual beneficial situation that we should focus on. And during the course of interviewing people on my project, somebody said, when nature is healthy, we have a better chance of being healthy. And that's absolutely true. Humans are part of nature. We sometimes like to think that we are on top of the heap, but in reality, we're a cog in the wheel of this great wheel where everything works together. So when we build a living shoreline and replace something that's not working very well for nature, we're also helping ourselves. And this Venn diagram points that out. So the benefits to nature are at the top there. Maintaining coastal processes, the connection between land and water, improving habitat. And down at the bottom, we get aesthetic and recreational value. We get a reduction in property damage from weather events. It improves our community well-being, economic well-being, but these things overlap. And the 3 elements in the center there are things that both benefit nature and benefit people. Next slide. There's a lot of hardening of shorelines, and homeowners are faced with choosing whether to continue to do this or not. And we really want them to make better choices, and that's one of the things that WeShore is trying to do. There are some numbers there on how much is hardened, and I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but basically 14% of the shoreline in the continental US is already hardened, and the rates are increasing because of sea level rise. And if we keep doing this, that number will go up to 1/3 of all US coastlines by 2100. And if you think about the damage that's already been done, by what's been hardened thus far, and what's been taken out of productivity, this is a really bad situation that we all need to try to do something about. Next slide. But homeowners have to make decisions, and there are certain barriers, and these are some of the barriers. So we think of things that are constructed by humans as being really strong. So these concrete seawalls, armoring, that's really effective. Sometimes they don't have enough information. They feel like shoreline hardening is easy to understand. They know about it, they've seen it before. And living shorelines, maybe they don't quite understand what that's about. And then there's a number of systemic issues, like what are these things going to cost? It's pretty easy to get a contractor to tell you what a seawall will cost. But when you're working with something like a living shoreline, that might be a little more difficult to sort out. Next slide. And so I started thinking about how can design help this problem? How can it assist waterfront homeowners to connect to other people that they need, contractors and so on, and team up with nature so that they can be successful in achieving a living shoreline. Next slide. So we looked at the stakeholder ecosystem here. There's a lot of stakeholders. Even nature is a stakeholder here. Our land and water, our visitors, myself as a designer, and the people I work with, like Vincent, contractors are a part of this. And so pulling out the primary audience for this project, if you look at those 3 circles on the left, those are the main audiences, with the primary audience being waterfront homeowners, and then secondary audience, contractors. Next slide. And our study location, this is a generalized view of where some of the properties I looked at were, all in our area, Martin and St. Lucie County along the East Coast, and the St. Lucie River and the Indian River Lagoon. Next slide. So one of the things that we used in order to try to figure out what would work for everybody is this co-design process. And basically co-design allows people that are involved in the outcome of what we're doing to take part in the design process so that their needs are known. And I love this quote by Julia Watson here because I think it really kind of says it all. As designers, we need to remember that we're part of nature. Our global survival is dependent upon our thinking shifting from survival of the fittest to survival of the most symbiotic. Next slide. So the goal is, how do we become symbiotic? And one of the things that I did is I interviewed a number of people, contractors and homeowners, to try to figure out what was important to them and what kinds of perceptions they had about living shorelines. And so these concentric circles on the right are too much detail to really comprehend in this presentation. But the main things that we found out from interviewing people is, how do they find information about living shorelines? And most people went online, but a lot of people also found out information about living shorelines from a local expert like Vincent, and they met local experts in a variety of ways by taking a class like Water Ambassadors. They got referrals by calling the county, or maybe they met somebody at an outreach event. And the bottom line with the comments was that people wanted to have a simple process to follow. And one person said, we need to be shown everything, which I thought was really powerful. Next slide. So we started working on WeShore, and one of the things that I focused on was how to tell this story. And so in trying to figure that out, I created a brand story. And the brand story is nothing more than the look and feel and total experience of what a person will have when they encounter something. And usually you'll see a brand story associated with a product. But WeShore has a brand story, and it looks and feels when you interact with it that it's friendly, it's approachable. There's a path you can follow. It's upbeat and fun and can do. So it makes you feel like you can achieve something, and it provides the tools that you need to make your journey easier. And we're all in this together. So we're going to work with nature instead of trying to overcome nature. And the real goal of it is to take this complex process of creating a living shoreline and breaking it down, kind of like the oyster, taking in all that bad stuff and filtering out what it can need so that it's comprehensible and non-intimidating. So it's something you can do, not something to be concerned about. Next slide. Oh, we're gonna skip this one. This is identity mark design. So these next three are basically the process of trying to come up with the WeShore logo. And I'm not really going to go into this too much because it doesn't relate directly, but there's the final identity mark that we chose for WeShore. Next slide. One thing that came out of the interview process was this idea of a journey map, which is just a ginormous piece of paper that I made where I tried to write down every single thing I found out from everybody, from homeowners to contractors to restoration professionals. And what this is trying to do is to figure out where are the pain points. So what works, what doesn't, how do people find information, where do they go, what happens when they go online, where do they try to do something and fail. And the idea here is to figure out a direction that the design process can inquire into so that when we create something, it addresses these problems that people have. Next slide. So out of that journey map and also a lot of conversations with restoration folks, I figured out that one of the things that was missing in the Living Shorelines discussion was a simple roadmap on how this process worked. I spent a lot of time looking online at various websites that had information about living shorelines. And I thought I understood this process until I did that. And then I realized I really didn't know what the steps were. And I know this looks pretty simple, but I spent a lot of time trying to distill this down to this 6-step process. And so we're going to, going forward, call this the roadmap. And those down at the bottom, the roadmap action steps are the steps that you would take as a homeowner to move forward with your living shoreline. And I'll read them out. So you're going to learn about your options, then define project goals. You're going to assemble the team. The team is going to work on your project. The team will build your shoreline, and then hopefully you'll share it, because sharing it with other people, sharing your success, is a really important part of getting other people involved and getting them to be willing to go through this process as well. Next slide. Example of, now we're doing a website. So that was one of the things I think I didn't mention, but coming out of the homeowner interview process and how they actually used media and figured out where to find out information, we determined that a mobile-friendly website would be the first execution that we would create. And so this is an initial site architecture sketch for that website. And you'll see up at the top, those roadmap action steps that came out of the journey map are really driving the design of the site. Next slide, please. Not going to really go into this because this is basically a web diagram. Every website you look has one of these flow diagrams behind it. And this is what we use to try to figure out how somebody that's looking at the site would move through it. Next slide. And then a working process slide to show my process of sketching things out before we actually start to create the pages. I do this all by hand. I make notes. I shared this with Vincent and some other folks as a sort of process document, and tried out various things to figure out what assets do we need. So what images do we need? What kind of text, what copy do I need to write? What's going to be most useful for people, and how they are going to be able to use this site when it actually goes live. Sometimes another way to do this is with Post-it notes, and you can actually make little sketches on Post-it notes and move it around. Next slide. So once the sketches got going, I started going back to that brand story and looking at the design of this, the look and feel, and trying to figure out what would be simple for people to use, and also so appealing that they would want to come back to this again and again. A lot of the sites that I looked at that dealt with living shorelines were very technical, and the diagrams in them were very technical, and I love that stuff, but it seems like it was a little off-putting because it didn't really relate so much to the homeowner and what their issues were. So I started exploring some different options for the home page and how the main navigation would work on this site. And going left to right there, got the idea of the mangrove tree, the canopy to the roots being sort of a pathway, and backing up that idea of connecting land and water together, and then having the navigation flow out of that. So starting with the options that people had, and then all the way down to sharing. And then looking at some other ways to navigate, keeping in mind that this is going to be on a phone and you're going to scroll vertically. There would also have to be at some point a second version of this that would be more adaptable to a tablet or to a desktop computer, because when we talked to the interviewees, we found out a lot of people were not using their phones because it was hard to see. And so they were looking at stuff on tablets. But you'll see different ways of navigating. So what is important here? In the third one over, there's a hot color button that says what a living shoreline can do for you. Trying to get across right up front that those benefits to people and nature are significant. And then down below, different ways to move into the site. You'll see those roadmap options again, but instead of just the little dots like over in number 1 there, now there's a mascot on each one of these, and that mascot helps. Once you go further into the site, that helps people realize where they are as they navigate around. Next slide. And there's our mascots. And these are all creatures that might show up on your shoreline if you build a living shoreline, including the little oyster catcher bird. He's very cool and won't come around unless he's got some oysters to check out. Next slide. Some more information about the site navigation and color coding these. Each of these roadmap steps has its own color and its own mascot. Next slide. And now we're getting into the main 6 pages. And of course, you can navigate off of all these pages, but what are your options and what kind of goals? There's a project list option here, so you can try to figure out what it is that you'd like to do, so you can share that with a contractor. On my team, talks about restoration professionals and other people you might work with. And then the We Work section talks about the process of how things get done. So who does what? It turns out that the homeowner doesn't really have to do a whole lot themselves. And so one of the goals of this site is to dissuade people from getting upset about the permitting process and that sort of thing. We build, actually, once you start building the thing, how does that happen? What's the order? What goes in first? And then some information about how to share. Next slide. And I'm not going to spend any time on this other than to say this is the first prototype of the entire site and all the pages that are currently on it. And it's a work in progress. So we've got a significant amount of work to do moving forward. One of the comments that came out of the prototyping was that there was too much text and that people felt like they wanted more things to look at rather than things to read. Next slide. So we did user testing and used the Adobe XD platform to build this prototype on, which is really cool. And it allows you to export this to a web page that people can interact with just as if they were looking at it on their phone. And it allows them to make comments, just like if you were making comments on a Word document or whatever. And so the people you see here commenting were actually some of our interviewees and project participants who took the time to look through this and interact with it and give us some feedback to try to make this better. Next slide. Some of the main takeaways. People really like this in general. They like the colors, but they found some color combinations hard to read. There was a little confusion about how to navigate it. And again, they felt like that they would like to have more photos. Next slide. So where do we go in the future? Well, one thing that we're doing right now is Vincent and I are going to continue to work on this project together to make it better. We're still taking feedback, and so you can email me if you have any comments on it, and if there's anything like you would like to input. So this will be an ongoing situation for us, and eventually we'd like to expand this. Right now, it's focused mainly at the East Coast, Martin, St. Lucie County, perhaps up to Brevard, but eventually we'd like to expand this statewide and perhaps beyond, and then also versioning it to include stormwater ponds and home rain gardens, which isn't something that I talked about, but also those things are things you can do in your yard that help keep stormwater out of the Indian River Lagoon. So that's a thing that we want to eventually include. And some of the things on the left to the mobile site design that need to be done, and also working with partners. So more user testing. We need to figure out the sharing mechanism, how's that going to work, and some various strategies to promote it. And then there's a number of different spin-offs that were print oriented, because some people indicated that they would like a print option as well. And then the things on the right are in yellow and green are some things that are either in planning, or, are things that are sort of like, blue sky things that we want to think about. What are the aesthetic aspects of oyster reefs? How can we do workshops to make this information more engaging to people on the ground once we don't have to worry about COVID any longer? And then what kind of continuity will there be for people that have done this and want to, we want to make it easier for other people to do it. And so that's part of that whole sharing story. Next slide. And so to end up, there's our beautiful mangroves. And we'd like to see more of those around. Next slide. And if you'd like to contact us, here is our contact information. I'm at Gmail, and Vincent, of course, is at Sea Grant IFAS. And so feel free to send me an email if you want to find out more or have any suggestions for us on how to make this a better project for everybody. And I'd like to thank everybody for listening to it, and looking forward to hearing some of your questions and comments about what we've done.
Thank you so much, Marjorie. And we have a lot of questions for you. So I'm going to get started. And as I read the first one, I'm also going to be putting up the evaluation poll for everyone to complete. So you should see that popping up in just a second. Okay, your first question is going back to oyster reefs. Are oyster reefs meant to regenerate oysters, or just shells to stabilize the shoreline?
Vincent, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is meant to be a self-sustaining structure. Oysters are known as ecosystem engineers. So if you put that foundation of oyster shell, a dead oyster shell out there, or whatever hard materials that can be out there, whether it's rock or limestone, the live oysters that settle on it and grow will eventually reproduce, and there'll be new baby oysters that'll contribute, and there'll be successive generations of oysters, so that to make that a self-sustaining structure.
So multiple benefits, both structurally as well as the filtration.
Yep.
Okay. Next question regarding the mangrove portion of the living shoreline. What if the mangroves get too prolific? Is it not protected? Is it not a protected plant and cannot be cut back or moved?
Marjorie, do you want me to?
Yeah, Vincent, why don't you start, and then I may jump in also.
Okay. So mangroves are protected in the state of Florida. You can trim them. They can only be trimmed down to 6 feet. That's from the base of the roots to the top. And they can be maintained without permit between 6 and 10 feet. If they grow higher than 10 feet, then you have to use a certified, what they call a professional mangrove trimmer. So a landscaper or some other environmental professional that has a license to trim mangroves that are 10 feet or larger in size. There's a lot of misperceptions about mangroves with regards to trimming. So if you have a mangrove that's under 10 feet, you can trim it down to 6 feet without requiring any special license.
And I just wanted to chime in a little bit, because everything is a balance. And so I was a waterfront property owner in Martin County. I live up in Sebastian now, but I think that the benefits of mangroves far outweigh the potential issues with mangroves, which are mostly aesthetic issues. And mangroves can be windowed, various things can be done to preserve the view, which is what most people are concerned about. at the same time providing all these myriad of benefits that you'll get as a homeowner from the services that they provide. And I can't reiterate strongly enough that our water issues are human caused. And so if we want to have a healthy environment and a healthy economy, Florida without clean water is not a place many people are going to want to be at. So I would urge everybody to think about mangroves as partners in our common journey, and to embrace them as much as you can. And if you're talking to other people about mangroves, make sure that you can talk about them in terms of this partnership and their benefits, and not just the potential issues with them about blockading, blocking the view, or getting too prolific.
Okay, thank you. The next question is going back to oysters. Are oysters actually thriving in the St. Lucie, considering the freshwater discharges and algae blooms?
I think that's a question for Vincent, because he's more involved with the monitoring piece of that.
Yeah, I'll go. Thanks, Marjorie. I'll go ahead and take that. So we do get large die-offs when we get excessive freshwater and prolonged freshwater discharges. When the water quality conditions return, they have the capacity to bounce back very quickly. So in between those excessive discharges, like we've had in 2016, 2017, and 2018, but prior to that and after, they recover actually quite nicely.
Okay. And then we have a question about your team. So who's your team consist of? Are they volunteers or are they employees? Or is it just you and Vincent?
Well, so the scary secret, I'll tell the scary secret is that it's largely Vincent and I, and I did this as a grad student. So basically, that means you did it for free. And I did it because I care. And even if I wasn't a grad student, I would have done it anyway, because it's something that's really been needed for a long time. There were some other folks involved. So we had input from James Oppenborn up in St. Lucie County on this project. And he's with the county as an environmental person. And also Dr. Glenn Coldren, who was previously at Florida Oceanographic Society. And Glenn actually provided the major focus on the idea of a roadmap. So he was pretty integral, but pretty much everybody that was involved in this was working on this project as a volunteer. Although Vincent did admit that he was on my committee. So his position is a little bit different, but everybody else was doing it totally voluntarily.
Yeah, and if the question also relates directly to this idea of the team that's involved in creating a living shoreline, ideally, I think what we'd like to see is that it's a team of professionals, and that Living Shorelines isn't just a grant-funded or volunteer-based project that a homeowner can reap the benefits from, but that it's actually an aspect of the commercial industry of I'd like to think of it as that sort of intersection, or that Venn diagram between ecologists, marine contractors, and designers or landscapers or landscape architects. So for example, we just completed last week teaching an online version of the Living Shorelines for Marine Contractors course. And that's really the direction that Sea Grant and other agencies within the state of Florida would like to move forward, is to help create a professional practice of living shorelines.
Okay. Next question. I've heard getting living shorelines are harder to permit nowadays. Is this true?
Marjorie, do you want me to take that one too?
I think I think Vincent probably will, maybe want to comment what I'm going to say, but I don't know that they're getting harder to permit, but the permitting changes all the time, and so it's kind of a moving target, if you will. But there's a specific process to it, and so I think from the homeowner standpoint, that's not the case. The homeowner is still going to work with DEP, and with your restoration professional is largely going to be dealing with the agencies involved. That might be DEP or the Army Corps, or some combination of them. But I don't know that it's getting harder to permit them, but it does change.
Yeah, I just second that. It's a hard process to begin with, as it is. So hopefully there'll be changes that where the process gets a little more streamlined. But for sure, it would be contingent on the professional working with the homeowner to be the lead on that process.
Vincent, one other thing we didn't really talk about, and I don't know that I don't have at my fingertips the specifics of it, but the expedited permitting, which for homeowners can simplify this a little bit. So depending on how many linear feet you've got, I mean, do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I won't get into the details just because there's specific criteria that have to be met. There is a permit exemption for living shorelines, provided that you meet certain criteria, and you can have that certified. You can either try to get that exemption criteria to meet it and have it certified. It's best to have that certified by DEP, even though there is a fee for that as well. And that does expedite being able to install a living shoreline.
So that potentially can make the homeowner process easier in some cases, and that's site dependent and location dependent.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Is there a tax benefit for homeowners who install living shorelines?
Right now in Florida, there is not, but that is the case in other states. And it would be a really good idea for Florida to have a property tax benefit for this. I don't want to get into anything political right now, but that's a goal for the future, I think, because it is successful in other states.
Okay. We have a lot of interest and a lot of thanks. And one note, this is great. How can Volusia County get involved? So
Well,
any thoughts of expanding this northwards? And
absolutely. And Vincent, you want to jump on that a little bit? Because I know there's some stuff going on up in Volusia County already.
Right. I think probably through some of the estuarine restoration teams, which the East Central Estuarine Restoration Team, which is a kind of a working group formed by led by FWC, that would be one of the venues for potential collaboration with the other agency people and professionals that are involved in estuarine habitat restoration. And they have a Northeast companion group as well called the NERT, for Northeast Restoration Team. So that's probably where we're going to try to, as Marjorie and I work on this and try to get this live, get it refined, and then eventually get it as a live mobile friendly site, then during that process is probably where we're going to try to find other partners that would want to collaborate on the development and launch.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in a little bit and just say that the ultimate goal of this is to have this to work for all of Florida. and not just for our particular region of Florida, because Florida's got a lot of coastlines, and this could be a boon to all kinds of people that are interested in doing this and maybe just don't know how to go about it.
Okay. Vincent, I think you casually touched upon it, but someone has a comment that since it's just you two, have you thought about utilizing and training Sea Grant agents to educate homeowners and landscapers on utilizing and designing these shorelines?
Well, that process is already occurring, and some of the pictures that Marjorie showed in from Cedar Key, a lot of those projects were really catalyzed by largely in part by Savannah Berry, who is a regional Sea Grant agent. Is that correct, Lisa? And she's done a lot of work with Living Shorelines, and I've been working with her and another Sea Grant agent on developing the virtual version of that marine contractors course. And we have a working group within Sea Grant where we share all that information and all those ideas and develop priorities for each year. And there are a number of agents that are active in these kinds of projects. So yes, it is an ongoing process. WeShore is still relatively new to everybody, but that's I was kind of waiting for Marjorie to finish her thesis and then kind of get to that next stage where Sea Grant can get a little bit more directly involved in what she's developed.
Okay, we had a couple questions about if this is going to be available, if the recording's available, and it is, and I posted the web link again. It's a confusing web link, so if you just Google Martin County Sea Grant, you can go to that page and then navigate on the right-hand side. It has all of the recordings from this year as well as last year's Water Ambassador program too, I believe are still available. Just give us a day or so to get it posted. Is there any difference in what's being done in Martin and St. Lucie counties versus Palm Beach counties or other counties?
So in terms of the plant installations and oyster reefs and so on, I mean, this whole region is going to use pretty much the same things. I don't know. I really don't know, other than the couple of big public projects that have been done in Palm Beach County, like Lake Worth. What is being done in Palm Beach County, especially regarding homeowners. But unless, Vincent maybe has more insight into that than I do, but I think that the techniques of living shoreline installation and the materials that are being used are probably going to be common to Martin, St. Lucie, and Palm Beach County.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Marjorie. I think for the most part, yes. I think the big difference, it's not a striking difference, but a lot of our focus with Marjorie's project and a little bit of the work that I did a number of years ago, try to work more with private homeowners. And most of the Living Shorelines projects that have been done at the county government level are typically focused on public properties. And part of that is that, it's just a little bit easier process. The needs and goals are there for the county itself, and it's obviously in the public interest to do those for those particular locations. But as far as the county getting involved, any county getting directly involved with homeowners, it's somewhat limited.
One thing I want to add to what Vincent just said, and just to bring up the importance of the homeowner piece of this, is that if you look at the number of square miles of canals that have been created, just look at Martin County I used to live in North River Shores. So North River Shores, Seagate Harbor, and some of these other places where these dredged canals have been created. And there's a big opportunity there for homeowners who have seawalls to do some seawall retrofitting, to make theirs, they can't have necessarily living shorelines, but they can do something with their spaces that will help improve the usefulness of those spaces to nature. And that's something I think to really, for us to think about and include in WeShore. We do have a whole segment on what can be done for people that live on canals, because I think more people live on canals than live on the wide water. And so getting these options out there for everybody that's a homeowner is really, really important.
Thank you. So it's 1 o'clock and that's the end of our questions. I have a question, but I just want to make it known that we do have a lot of kudos and thank you and great presentations. So thank you, our audience and our water ambassadors. Really appreciated your talk today. My question is while you're still in development of this website and the mobile application, can the content that you've developed be found anywhere? Is it accessible?
You know, I could share. I can share with you, Lisa. I don't know how we can put it on the chat right now, but I can email you a link to the prototype where people can, you know, scroll through this and put some comments of their own up.
If you're okay with sharing that, we can disseminate it to the participants today, and we can put a note saying, you know, don't distribute further or something, if we can figure out how you would like that to be distributed.
Yeah, I'll send you an email and then you can share that with everybody that participated.
Okay,
and
great.
I'd love to get some more feedback from everybody. So that would be great.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. Thank you. Okay. All right, well, thank you again so much. And thank you all water ambassadors for participating today in the presentation. And hopefully we will see you in 2 weeks. The topic is harmful algal bloom or algal bloom monitoring in the St. Lucie Estuary and Indian River Lagoon with Malcolm McFarland. Thank you.